told you that a man that I never met who died over 10 years ago has been unknowingly running my business decisions from the shadows? Today, we're diving into my father wounds and how they showed up in my entrepreneurial journey, even when I thought that I completely dealt with it. So, remember in the last episode how I said Eden and Empire was something that I had been envisioning for over 5 years. Technically, I didn't have all the specifics, right? I didn't have a name. I didn't know what it was going to be. I just knew that it was going to be this online membership. And when I was in Goldman, on my Goldman Sachs journey last year, I felt so much confirmation in building this specific membership. And I moved really quickly because I felt God's confirmation in so many areas. And in my mind, I, had set a launch date that I felt is the date that God wanted. And maybe it was, maybe He did want that specific timing because I needed to experience what I was experiencing. But when I opened the doors to the membership, the numbers were not what I envisioned at all. And that it's not extremely uncommon, and I did great. I think the feedback and just what I experienced with Eden and Empire with the beta launch for the first 3 months was great. It just wasn't what I had envisioned. And if you know anything about me, I'm a big visionary. I dream big, I think big, I have big goals. I set them very unrealistically, and then I'm so disappointed when they don't meet my expectation. And so with what I felt in my mind, I loved the direction that I was going, but so many things kept popping up. And I knew that I could have kept pushed past it, and I could have been kept ignoring this feeling that something was just off. And by worldly metrics, it looked very typical to a soft launch or a beta launch. The data shows that it's common to have lower numbers initially, and I could have in my mind just said, just give it time, just stay consistent. Honestly, that's what I felt like doing. I told myself in my head, just keep going. These are typical, but something felt very off, which is not typical for me. And instead of pushing harder, I felt this really strange piece about pausing. When the world says fake it until you make it, sometimes God says stop and let me show you something. And if you go back, like I said in my last episode, and look at my social media, you'll hear a lot of the uncertainty that I had. And it wasn't until I was writing this episode today that I realized that God was speaking to me just as clearly as I'm speaking to you. And I heard Him. So most often I felt like, oh my gosh, is this God? Is this Him? Is this me in my mind? And what was actually happening is these feelings that I had of being unsure were, sure about His voice, sure about His wisdom. It was actually me having discernment all along, but this thing that I was needing to deal with was clouding that. And it felt like I couldn't hear Him clearly when I was hearing everything He was telling me, and I was actually doing it. But I was second guessing every single aspect of what I was doing. And I could feel within everything that I needed to pause. And I could feel that my content wasn't resonating in my spirit. So I stopped. And I felt this heavy reliance on what I was doing within my content. And the reason why it felt like it wasn't resonating is I was relying too much on my knowledge, on books, on, Claude, which I like to call my assistant. I was hearing everything and relying on everything, and I'd open up the Bible and read scripture and listen to apps and do all these things. But the thing that I feel like I wasn't relying on enough was just hearing His voice. And I was pushing myself into burnout, and I knew it. But I told myself I have a very strong tolerance for stress, very high tolerance for workloads. Very high tolerance for workloads, all of those things. And when ultimately I do, but I needed to learn how to do it differently. And right around this time, something really weird started happening. So one of the things that I will say is I'm home with my son this summer. And I refused to quiet him. I refused to not do the podcast episodes because he was home. So you may hear some of him in the background. You may see like edits where I pause if he comes and talks to me, but just know that I'm doing it with him home regardless. And so, anyway, right around this time, something really bizarre started happening, and ex-boyfriends started popping up out of the woodwork, which is so random, right? Specifically, I had one from 16 years ago that wasn't really of any significance to me. Sorry. I don't mean that to sound mean, but it wasn't really a great, there wasn't much to the relationship. And I want to paint the picture of what I mean by popping up. So one of them showed up at a restaurant that my husband and sons and I were at when we were eating. There was another time that I was driving in a part of town that I'm not normally in, and I just so happened to see him on his motorcycle next, like somewhat next to me, and I was like, that's crazy. And then the one, though, that I referenced earlier was one that I hadn't spoken to in over 17 years. And so I know I said 16, and it's 16, almost 17 years. So I hadn't spoken to him in a very long time. And he sent me a DM wishing me happy birthday. And just for context, I've been with my husband for 17 years. We started dating our sophomore year. And he's my high school sweetheart, right? We've been happily married for 17 years, and I don't and didn't actually want anyone else. And so when I saw these guys popping up, it was very weird. He knew about it. And I was just like, this is weird. And in my mind, I just had all these thoughts that wouldn't stop. And I was like, what is happening to me? But two of the guys were ones that out of my past relationships had actually rejected me. They were the only two. And I had been replaying these scenarios in my mind, right? Like wanting them to see my life now, right? Like one of them I wasn't friends with on social media. One I had been friends with for a really long time. He's the one that had wished me happy birthday. We didn't speak, barely saw each other's content and whatnot. And it just like started replaying in my mind, like, oh, I want him to see what my life is like now, all the what ifs. And suddenly I couldn't stop thinking about those. And it started to torment me, honestly, like just being full transparent. Obviously, my husband knows about it. And I had spoken to a friend about it because it was really bothering me. And she told me to look up soul ties and read this book called The Spirit of Rejection. And so when I did that, everything started connecting. And my husband and I prayed about it. I told him, but it wouldn't go away. And I was like, I would pray and I'd say, Lord, please take this away. I know this isn't, I don't want to deal with this. Like, please, I don't have the strength. Take it away from me. There was nothing that would ever happen. It's just the thoughts. And I think as best you try to control the thoughts, they don't go away. And for so long, I was like, Lord, why are you not taking this away? Can you not hear me? But I was like, okay. And there were moments where it would feel like, okay, it was fine. But after reading this book, I went to Claude and I had typed in several things, and everything started to come together for me. So my mom had me when she was 15, and my biological father was also 15. And when my mom went into labor, she told my father about it, and he made the decision not to show up. And I remember once when I was younger, I briefly asked my mom about my dad. I was probably like 9 or 10. And my mom, I never really asked much about it because I didn't want to upset her, but she was always so sweet. Like she always just kind of waited for me to ask, and she was never upset and told me what she knew. And honestly, I felt like it was sufficient for me. And I think the reason why I didn't push so much for it is because I had my grandpa in my life, and he was a father figure to me. We were very close. And then I had my stepdad, who was a part of my life starting at 8. But my mom was sufficient enough for me. I never felt like I was lacking in that area. And I had always just felt like, well, he didn't want to get to know me. That was his loss. That's just a piece of me that I'll never know. And so in my head, I always felt really strong about it. And it was just really black and white, right? Like, my biological father was really young when he had me. He didn't want me. End of story. Like, that's maybe one day I'll find him. So I remember when I was in my early 20s, I think, we had gone to Colorado, which is where I'm from. It was my mom, Matt, my husband, my siblings, and I. And unknowingly to me, my mom had met up with a mutual friend of her and my biological dad. And the friend had told her that my father had been killed several years earlier at the age of 26. And when she found this out, I remember we were at the mall and I had seen her crying and I was like, what? Okay. And then so when we got back to my grandma's house, her and my grandma called me into the room. They told me about it. And I remember feeling this, just like, I don't even know. It felt like, I can't even put a word to what this felt like. But I remember going into I said, okay. And I don't think I processed it, but it's like, how can you grieve somebody that you never even knew? And I cried, and I remember Matt came in the room and was hugging me, and I told him, and I was like, okay. And then I just moved forward with it, right? I cried and came to terms with it. And then I fast forward to 2018 when we had my oldest boy, so our first son. We decided to do an ancestry DNA test because I never knew any part of that side of me. And you kind of want to know when you're bringing another life into, the picture, like what this piece of him is. And potentially I also wanted to know of anything genetically, which we never did any of those tests with him, but we did with my youngest. But I believe at the time that was really the beginning of the healing that God had started for me, and I never knew it. Within 2 weeks of doing this DNA test and never knowing anything about my biological father or any of his family, I had never even seen a picture of him. At 28 years old, I finally found answers. And so through Ancestry DNA, what ended up happening is I found a family member of mine. Her name's Patrice, and she will always have a special place in my heart. She's married to my father's cousin, so she's married to my second cousin, and she helped me search. And what ended up happening is it became difficult because my father's side of the family knew that I was looking for answers because I had questioned found some family members on Facebook, reached out, there were no answers. And my second cousin was not close with that side of the family, so it was difficult. They didn't have a lot of answers on that end. And, I'd reach out to other people that I potentially would find and they wouldn't respond. And through all of our searching, finally, I found one of my uncle's phone numbers and I called him. And I could still feel this fear that I had when he finally answered. Because I think initially he didn't answer on the first call. And then he might have called me back, or I called again and he finally answered. I don't remember. But after a while, so I was talking to him and he was questioning me. And I remember him being so like, who is this? We don't just give out any information about our family. You need to answer questions first. And I was like, okay, I don't really know much, but I will tell you what I know. And he was very guarded because he didn't even know I existed. And what ended up happening is, he told me some things about my dad. My biological father. And, he and his family were very scattered. They were all over and they weren't extremely close. And so he finally believed me and started to tell me some of these things. And he told me that my biological dad was shy. He was very reserved. He was kind. He was really smart, and he was into welding. And he said that he was a really good person. And I had some peace. And he told me that he was going to give my number to my aunt, and that she had probably really wanted. He knew that she really wanted to speak to me, because they had, been talking, because probably of the messages that I had sent previously. So he gave my information to her. She called me, and then another close friend of my biological dad called me. And so the family, again, never knew anything about me, but my aunt welcomed me with open arms. And the details are still really muddy, but what I ended up finding out is that my biological father had moved from Colorado to Oklahoma because there were other family members there. My grandfather, so his dad, had died when he was 17. His dad had died before he was born, I think in a motorcycle accident. And then his mom, and apologies if I get this wrong, his mom had passed away from cancer at the age of 17. So he was really, really young when he lost his parents, and he had several siblings. I want to say 7, maybe. And that's probably not right. But a lot of them were much older than him. So he wasn't very close with a lot of them. And he had gone to Oklahoma just to search for some more answers, to search for some more family. And he also lost one of his sisters that he was closer with a few years prior. So the family had grown apart. He went to Oklahoma and got a job in an apartment. He wasn't there for a very long, but in that time, he had found some friends, was hanging out with these friends, and one instance, he was robbed of his entire paycheck. And then one evening, while he was in his apartment, he had someone else over with him, and he was stabbed and killed. And from what I gathered, it was potentially drug related. But about 10 days later, a family member had called to do a well check visit, or requested a well check visit from the police, and they found him in his apartment. So it had been 10 days that he was there. And for me, I had searched and searched and searched, and it's crazy the instant that I could piece together, because I had his first, middle, and last name, and I had always searched that, but I never knew it was in Oklahoma. And so the minute I found it, articles that I had been searching for and overlooked were right there. And in that instant, for the first time in 28 years, I finally saw my father's face. And these news articles somewhat described his murder, and they never found the person that did it. They convicted someone, or they had someone in custody but let him go. But to this day, I've never seen any other photos of him except the one. But one day, a package arrived in the mail, and inside of it were letters from other family members, from those family members to my dad or to my aunt, his hat and his autopsy report and his ashes. And so all of those things are with me. I have them in a special box that's in a place in my home, but it has his ashes and everything. I don't like to call him my dad because the man that my mom married, who's my stepdad, he's been incredible, and he's who I consider my dad. But I do like to acknowledge him in my life, and I feel like there's some importance to that. So I thought that in finding him and his family, the story had ended and it had healed me. But, in all of this, I thought I had processed it. But with those ex-boyfriends showing up, the obsessive thinking that I thought that I had overcome and that I couldn't shake, it was just the beginning of God showing me that I had deep wounds that had been rejection, that were rooted deep into my soul, that I needed to heal. So in this next episode, I'm going to share how all of this helped me. And I think it just really helped me realize that I never actually healed those rejection wounds. I kind of just swept them under the rug, and they were secretly running a lot of my business decisions, my relationships, and honestly, even my entire life. So if you ever have felt like you're building something and you can't shake this feeling of you're not enough, or you want to people please, or some part of your success being hindered, or maybe you're fighting for it, or it needs protected, I want you to tune in, because I really want to share what I discovered next, and maybe it'll help give you some clarity around that.